The Splinter Wars. War Beyond Time. Act 1. The Fracture Awakens. Chapter 1. Ash in the Air. Earth Prime, July 16, 2045. Site Trinity Rift, Sector 0. The desert was not silent. It hissed, low, constant, like a dying machine. Winds scraped burnt sand against fractured glass, carrying the sour stench of ozone and scorched stone. Mason Voss adjusted the filter on his helmet, the visor flickering faintly as it recalibrated against the growing radiation haze. The Geiger counter on his wrist clicked in irregular staccato. Faster now. The rift was waking up. He moved carefully, boots crunching over the shattered crust left behind by the first great fire. The Trinity Blast, a name carved into history with flame and fear. Yet none of the textbooks had ever mentioned the thing it left behind, the fracture in the skin of reality itself. Ahead, the skeletal remains of the old test tower jutted from the cracked earth, twisted metal half sunk in a pool of blackened glass. Above it, the sky rippled, not with heat but with something deeper. A shimmer like oil floating atop water refracted the sun into sickly rainbows. The rift. Mason paused at the perimeter, scanning the horizon. Dust devils twisted in the distance, kicking up ash and debris. No movement, no sounds but the restless desert. "Command, this is Voss," he said, voice low against the static buzz of his comms. "I'm at Sector 0. Rift activity is escalating, perimeter sensors showing anomalies." The reply crackled, barely coherent. Firmed. "Rift instability increasing. Window in. 05 minutes. 5 minutes. Maybe less." Mason tapped the comms once to acknowledge and pressed forward, heart thudding against his ribs in a slow, heavy drumbeat. He checked the ground. A habit burned into him from years of ops in hostile territory. Something was wrong. The ground, where it had been smooth and glassy a week ago, was cracked wide open. Thin fissures spiderwebbed outward from the base of the tower. And worse, footprints. Heavy boot prints deep in the brittle crust leading away from the rift. Fresh. Mason dropped to a knee, running a gloved hand over the indentations. Deep tread, military issue, but the pattern didn't match Directorate gear. Whoever had crossed through wasn't one of theirs. "Command," he murmured, voice tight. "We have breach evidence. Unknown units. Repeat, unknown." Before he could rise, the rift screamed. It wasn't sound as much as it was feeling. A low, wrenching howl that vibrated in the bones, tearing into his skull like splintered glass. Mason stumbled, catching himself against the leaning frame of an old sensor tower as the air split open. The rift tore wide. Through the burning crack in the sky, Mason saw flashes of another world. A city crumbling under black clouds, skyscrapers shattered and half-submerged in red sand. Figures moved there, men and women in armored suits, sleek and angular, haloed in a corona of electric blue. And then they were here. The figures stepped through the rift in perfect formation. Their armor glinted under the broken sun, their weapons thrumming with unnatural energy. They moved like predators, silent, efficient, deadly. Mason's mouth went dry. This wasn't a scouting error. It was an invasion. A shadow moved behind them. Something massive, mechanical legs clicking into the earth, followed. A machine, easily 20 feet tall, bristling with mounted turrets and bladed appendages. Its body shimmered with shields too advanced for anything Mason had seen on Earth Prime. And it wasn't alone. More ripples in the rift, more soldiers. Mason's instincts screamed at him to fall back, to warn command, but the rift's energy was scrambling his comms into useless static. He ducked low, heart hammering, slipping behind the rusted hull of a derelict monitoring bunker. From his hiding place, he watched as the invaders spread out, setting tripod-like devices into the ground, anchoring the rift open. Blue arcs of energy lanced between the tripods, stabilizing the fracture, making it wider. They weren't just here to explore. They were here to stay. Movement to his left caught Mason's eye. Dust plumed along the horizon. 3 Directorate Humvees coming in fast. Reinforcements. But they didn't know what they were rolling into. They thought they were responding to a standard rift spike, not a full breach. Mason cursed under his breath. They were about to be slaughtered. He rose into a crouch, hand instinctively finding the rifle slung across his back. He had 2 choices: stay hidden and survive, or act, and maybe buy the Directorate forces a chance to fight back. The lead Humvee crested a rise, and the invaders reacted instantly. The first soldier raised an arm. A flash of blue light erupted from his weapon, a beam of concentrated energy slicing the air. The Humvee exploded mid-roll, flipping end over end like a child's toy, flames belching into the sky. The other vehicles skidded to a halt, soldiers spilling out, weapons drawn. But they were hopelessly outgunned. Bullets sparked harmlessly off enemy armor. Energy blasts carved smoking holes in the desert. 2 Directorate agents fell before Mason could even think. Move, his instincts snarled, or they'll all die. Mason sprinted from cover, weaving low as a crackling bolt of rift energy sliced the air where his head had been a heartbeat before. He dropped behind the burning wreckage, sighting his rifle on the nearest invader. 1 shot straight through the helmet. The enemy staggered, and to Mason's shock, the armor sealed the breach, nanotech rippling across the wound. Shit, Mason breathed. Another Directorate soldier screamed, a searing blast taking him in the chest. Mason didn't think, he acted. He tore a sensor spike from his belt, jammed it into the ground, and triggered the overload. The spike detonated in a flash of electromagnetic fury, short-circuiting local tech, including the invaders' suits. 1 enemy staggered, sparking armor systems down. Mason moved in a blur, slamming the soldier into the dirt, ripping a small data module from the cracked chest plate. He barely had time to snatch it before more blue fire rained around him. He ran, legs pumping, lungs burning, dodging blasts that scorched the earth inches behind him. Somehow he made it back to the crater's edge, diving into the shelter of a shattered bunker. He jammed the module into his field reader. Data scrolled across the cracked screen. Target worlds: Earth Prime, Crucible Earth, Sundown Earth, Null Earth. Primary directive: subjugate, stabilize, expand. Mason stared at the words, blood pounding in his ears. They weren't just invaders, they were conquerors. And Earth Prime was first. Chapter 2. Footprints in the Glass. Earth Prime, July 16, 2045. Site: Trinity Rift, Sector 0, Outer Perimeter. The ground cracked under Mason's boots as he sprinted, each step scattering shards of blackened glass. The burning wreckage of the Humvees lit the desert in a pulsing orange glow behind him. Overhead, the rift twisted the sky into a writhing wound of impossible colors. His comms buzzed with scrambled voices, useless. The invaders moved like wolves, fast, efficient, precise. They flanked the Directorate survivors with chilling coordination, weapons discharging bursts of silent, searing energy. Mason ducked behind a half-buried monolith of fused sand and steel, chest heaving. He clenched the stolen data module in his fist so tightly his knuckles ached. Proof. Proof they weren't just facing random incursions. This was a coordinated invasion. He risked a glance over the top of the wreckage. 5 invaders moved across the killing field, their suits glinting blue under the rift light. Their armor was smoother than any combat rig Mason had ever seen, liquid plates shifting with their movements, sealing wounds, adapting. A nightmare made real. But it was their leader that froze the breath in Mason's lungs, taller than the rest. Armor edged with black striations, a different energy flickering around them, like the rift itself obeyed their presence. Not just a soldier, a commander. Mason's instincts screamed, "Get the hell out!" Find command. Tell someone. And yet something rooted him to the spot. It wasn't fear. It was the footprints, not the fresh ones, crisp and deep. These were different. Scattered across the crater basin were faint, ghostly impressions. Shallow dents stamped in melted glass, half a dozen sets, wandering outward from the rift. Older, weeks old, maybe longer. Mason knelt, brushing his fingers across a set. The glass was pitted where the boots had pressed, almost like the world itself hadn't known how to hold them. And the strangest thing, each print was wrong. Subtle angles were off, proportions stretched. Not natural human stride lengths, not Earth Prime. He scanned the horizon. Where had they gone? A low, grinding rumble vibrated the ground. Mason shifted, peering toward the rift. The machine emerged fully now, a towering construct of metal and pulse fields, its legs driving into the sand with ponderous inevitability. It deployed something, small spider-like drones that scuttled out in organized patterns. Mapping, scanning, terraforming. Mason's stomach twisted. They weren't just passing through. They were preparing the ground for occupation. Another shockwave tore through the rift. New figures materialized, more soldiers dragging something massive between them. Mason squinted. A crate the size of a transport truck, bristling with anchor rods and coiled with cabling. Insignias in a language he didn't recognize flickered across its surface. And then, the lead invader raised a gloved hand. The column stopped. With a grinding hiss, the crate's sides folded open, revealing a beacon, sleek, humming, alive. Panels unfurled like insect wings, aligning themselves with the rift's gravitational field. The beacon's core pulsed. The rift above responded. The tear widened, bleeding more light, more wrongness into the sky. Tiny motes of matter began drifting free, bits of debris, pebbles, even Mason's loose gear starting to tug toward the shimmer. Gravity was breaking down. Panic lanced through him. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before this entire sector collapsed into a singularity. He ducked back, breathing hard, mind racing. Options. He needed options. The invaders were setting up permanent footholds. If they anchored the rift here, if they managed to stabilize it with that device, it wouldn't just be a portal anymore. It would be a gateway, a floodgate. Mason ground his teeth. He couldn't let that happen. One man can't stop a war, the cynical voice in his head muttered. Maybe not, but one man could slow it down. Fast, precise. Sabotage the beacon, disrupt the stabilization sequence. Then fall back and warn command before the rift fried his brain or ripped him into quantum spaghetti. He pulled a charge from his belt, a compact EM pulse bomb designed to fry electronics within a 50-meter radius. Not enough to close the rift, but enough to scramble the beacon and maybe destabilize the platform. Risky as hell. But if he did nothing, Earth Prime was already dead. He checked his gear. Half a magazine left. 2 charges, 1 flare. He breathed out slow. Move! Mason ghosted from cover to cover, moving low and fast between melted pylons and craters, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the clicks of the Geiger counter. The invaders were focused on their setup, unaware, or worse, unconcerned about the scattered humans nearby. He slid into position behind a broken drone crawler, 20 meters from the beacon. Now, he primed the charge, thumb hovering over the release. And then, a whisper in the glass. Mason froze. At the edge of his vision, he caught movement, not the invaders. Something else. A figure half seen through the haze. Slim, limping, wrapped in patchwork armor, not like the invaders' gleaming suits. Dragging something. Another survivor. Or something worse. Mason hesitated, torn. The charge ticked down in his hand. Mission first, he reminded himself. Save Earth. Then save whoever's left. He pushed the thought away and lobbed the device. The EM pulse exploded in a silent bloom of blue-white light. The beacon sputtered, arcs of electricity ripping across its wings. The rift shuddered, roaring like a wounded animal. Invaders shouted in harsh, clipped tones, rallying around the damaged core. Mason didn't wait to see if they noticed him. He bolted, sprinting full tilt across the wreckage, every muscle screaming. Energy bolts slammed the ground around him, kicking up molten shards. One blast grazed his shoulder, the armor plating sizzling as it absorbed the worst of it. Another figure appeared ahead, the patchwork survivor, staggering toward him, arm outstretched, something clutched in one blood-slick hand. Mason skidded to a halt, weapon raised. The survivor collapsed to one knee, gasping in a voice rough with sand and time. "Help! You have to stop it before it feeds." Mason caught the object thrust into his hands, a ragged shard of something metal, humming faintly. And etched across its surface, in letters he barely recognized, were the words, "Project Crucible, Earth 7B. Containment. Failed." Mason stared, breathless. A second rift was coming, one they weren't ready for. Not even close. Chapter 3. First Blood, Earth Prime, July 16th, 2045. Site Trinity Rift, Sector 0, Outer Perimeter. Mason didn't hesitate. He dragged the wounded survivor to his feet, slinging the man's arm over his shoulder. The patchwork armor was scorched, smelling of ozone and burnt plastic. Blood soaked through the seams. He was light, too light. A man used up and spat out by whatever hell he'd escaped. Energy bolts screamed overhead, vaporizing chunks of the cracked desert. The invaders had seen them. The rift's wound in the sky widened, bleeding strange, flickering shapes into the air. Broken outlines of skyscrapers, snarls of blackened trees, a distant mechanical roar that didn't belong to this world. Mason gritted his teeth. If they didn't move now, they'd be nothing but glass and ash. "Stay with me," he growled, hauling the man across the ruined terrain. They sprinted, or stumbled more like, toward the old maintenance tunnel cut into the side of the crater. It was half collapsed, but it would buy them time. Maybe enough. The ground trembled. Mason glanced back. The towering war machine lumbered after them, legs smashing into the desert with seismic force. Drones zipped ahead of it, scanning, tracking. He ducked as a bolt of rift energy detonated behind them, the shockwave knocking him off balance. Shards of superheated glass rained down, slicing through the air like razors. Mason shielded the survivor with his body, feeling the sting as slivers cut into his exposed arms. Pain later, survival now. They reached the maintenance hatch. Mason slammed the emergency override. Nothing. Dead system. Another blast hammered the ground nearby. The survivor whimpered, trying to curl into himself. Mason cursed, drew his sidearm, and fired 3 shots into the weak hinges. The hatch sagged open just enough. He shoved the man inside first, then dove in after him as another searing bolt lit up the world behind them. Inside, the tunnel reeked of mold and machine oil. Darkness pressed against them, broken only by Mason's flickering helmet light. He caught his breath for half a second, then sealed the hatch behind them with a piece of bent rebar jammed through the mechanism. It wouldn't hold forever, but it didn't have to. Mason dropped to one knee beside the survivor. Up close, the man was barely recognizable as human. His skin was pale, almost translucent, threaded with glowing veins. Radiation sickness? Rift exposure? Worse. The man pressed the metal shard into Mason's hands again, voice hoarse. "Crucible, Earth 7B, containment breach, it's coming through." His head lolled forward, breath shallow, fading. Mason squeezed his eyes shut, cursing under his breath. He didn't even know this man's name. Another ghost in a war no one had signed up for. Footsteps echoed behind him. Not heavy, fast. Mason spun, raising his rifle. Directorate soldiers spilled into the corridor. Sergeant Isla Crane at their head, visor cracked, face smeared with soot and blood. Her squad was battered but alive. "Boss!" she barked. "Status!" "Bad," Mason snapped. "Real bad." Crane's eyes narrowed as she took in the survivor, the shard, the distant thunder of the rift tearing itself wider. "You find proof?" she asked. Mason shoved the shard into her hands. "Better. A goddamn prophecy." She scanned the artifact. Her face went pale. Behind them, the tunnel walls vibrated, dust raining from the ceiling. A low, warbling hum filled the air. The beacon, the damaged one Mason had sabotaged. It was overloading. "Move," Mason barked, grabbing the survivor again. Tunnel won't hold if that thing blows. They ran, boots hammering the rusted floor. Sparks showered from overhead pipes. Alarms, long since dead, flickered back to life in ragged bursts of red light. A sudden screech split the air, metal ripping apart. Mason glanced back just in time to see the hatch crushed inward. The invaders were coming, and they weren't human anymore. The first one squeezed through the bent metal, half its body fused with rift tech, armor pulsing with unnatural growths. Its weapon arms split open into a trident of whirring, shifting blades. A rift-born. Mason shoved the survivor at Crane. "Get him to command." "What about you?" she snapped. "I'll buy you time." He didn't wait for permission. He turned and charged. The rift-born lunged. Mason met it head-on. His first shots ricocheted off its adaptive armor. He switched tactics, dropping low and firing into the joints where metal met flesh. The creature shrieked, a noise too high, too wrong, and lashed out. Mason ducked under the spinning blades, feeling the air slice past his face. He rolled, came up behind it, jammed his combat knife into the seam behind its shoulder plate, and twisted. The creature spasmed, shrieking again, but kept coming. It won't die like a normal soldier. Mason yanked the charge pack off his belt, last one, and slapped it onto the rift-born's spine. It whined, heating up. He dove away just as it detonated. The explosion shredded the creature, blowing molten fragments down the tunnel. The force slammed Mason into a wall, knocking the breath from his lungs. He staggered up, ears ringing, vision swimming. Ahead, Crane's squad fought a running retreat, dragging the survivor toward the secondary exit. Behind him, the rift shuddered again. More screams echoed from the surface. More invaders. The flood had begun, and Mason Voss, for better or worse, was now in the thick of the first true war Earth Prime had ever fought across realities. The Splinter Wars had begun.